Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the NowSecure DevSecOps bunch. It's the month of April, and if you're looking out the window like I am, spring is here. If you're in the Northern Hemisphere. Thank you for joining us this month. This is our monthly DevSecOps bunch webinar. As we typically do, we'll get started in about a minute. We'd like to give folks time to transition into the webinar session who might have been in a different meeting before this. I think we all live in this. Walt and I were just talking about how we live in this world where everybody's back to back in meetings. And so sometimes you want to wait a minute or two before people get started. I'll remind you that if you're new to the DevSecOps bunch, this is our monthly webinar series. We've been running for over 2 years, for about 2.5 years now. I've been joined by great guests from around the industry, bringing topical news, information, training, best practices to our audiences. We're very excited today to have Voler Systems joining us, and Walt, their president, joining us as well. And as I mentioned, we'll get started here in about another 30 seconds or so. Today's session is being recorded. Within a few days after today's session, you will get a copy of the webinar replay link. You can also get a copy of the slides. There are a number of additional assets and resources that Walt and I will be sharing today, and those links are embedded in the documentation that we're sharing with you as well, in case you want to visit those websites, read the case studies, and so on and so forth. So once again, here we go. Looks like we're about 2 minutes in. So again, my name is Brian Reed. I'm the Chief Mobility Officer here at NowSecure. I am the host and have been now for the DevSecOps bunch for a number of years. Our session this month and today is about some great things going on in the healthcare space, specifically around devices. So we're going to talk today about inside the latest FDA guidance on mHealth security for your mobile pipelines. So joining me today is a longtime expert when it comes to medical devices and the FDA, Walt Maclay. Walt, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Thank you. So Voler Systems is focused on electronic design services, including firmware, and we're particularly focused on IoT, wearable devices, and medical devices. And therefore, we got to pay attention to what the FDA is keeping changing.
Exactly. Welcome to the land of regulatory compliance and then some. So for those of you who are new, I'm Brian Reed, the Chief Mobility Officer at NowSecure. You might ask, what is a Chief Mobility Officer? Well, I've been doing mobile since the days of BlackBerry, or Crackberry, as many people called them. So I've got 15, 20 years of mobility in me. Chief Mobility Officer gives me the ability to be an evangelist, a strategist. I work with organizations on best practices around mobile security, mobile application security. I also work with standards community, OWASP, and others in terms of building and evangelizing standards. So today, beyond our introductions, we'll talk a little bit about our companies coming up here. We want to take a look at latest trends in mHealth, mHealth being the shortest way to articulate mobile health. Walt's going to walk us through the FDA rule changes we all need to be aware of, and whether you're building mobile apps and mobile devices for healthcare or not, this is a good look at how governments and regulators are working on standards and regulatory requirements for IoT and mobile applications in a variety of different industries. Here, of course, we're talking about medical. Then we'll go into a little bit of a putting it to work with some best practices. Walt and I have some case studies and some resources that we'll share as well at the end of today's session. For those of you who are new to our community here, so I'm with NowSecure. We were born in the early days of iOS and Android. And over the years, we've developed a wide suite of mobile-specific application security solutions. So we're first in mobile and only mobile. We got application security testing. We do pen testing work. We do training. We do consulting. We help write and build standards and specifications. So we're the financial sponsor of OWASP. We've also created other derivative specifications like ADA, which is for Android, ADA MASA, NIAP, and so forth. And so really our goal is to help you deliver secure mobile apps that meet the need of your business faster, better, cheaper, containing the risk you need, meeting the compliance you need for the particular industry that you're in. We do a lot of work in standards. I'm on a world tour right now. OWASP MASVS, which is the standard for the mobile application verification suite, just revved to V2. So we're running around the world telling the story around that. We work and are used by leaders in the tech community and the operating systems and the high tech vendors you would know. We work a lot with carriers around the world, and we are recognized by many as the experts in the space, be it G2, Gartner, or labeled an OWASP MES advocate from the OS community itself for our decade of support. Our customer base is wide and varied, largely around regulated industries, whether it's financial services, healthcare, insurance, retail, those types of organizations, along with federal agencies in the US and around the world. Wherever mobile is a critical part of the business, organizations turn to NowSecure for mobile security expertise, tools, technologies, and all that good stuff. Today, we'll talk a little bit about some of the healthcare organizations we've been working with. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Walt to tell us more about Voler Systems.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So as I mentioned, we do design services. We're focused on wearable devices, IoT, and medical. We've got a lot of expertise in sensors, all kinds of sensors, all the way to cameras, and also with wireless communication. And we're very good at low power management. So as wearable devices became hot and IoT became hot, it's the obvious thing for us to be focused on. We also have expertise in motion control, firmware, FPGAs, and even apps. You can change the slide.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're really noted for is doing on time, on budget projects. And the results are easily manufactured and easily pass FDA and CE certification and other certifications for non-medical devices. And we do this with careful planning and very meticulous project management. It's the key to success. Some companies aren't so good at that. So I've found that a lot of engineers don't have an experience with on time, on budget. We also have very senior engineers in our company, as well as some really good partnerships, such as with NowSecure. So we can provide all the aspects of a product from soup to nuts. The detailed communication is a critical part of project management. We do weekly reviews, we identify and resolve risks early, and when there's a roadblock, we address it quickly. You can go ahead.
All righty. So if our web administrator can help us out here, Earl, we're going to do a couple of polls today. So the first poll we have here that we'd ask you to answer is, what is your role? So we know there's people from the device world, from the medical world, from the security world, technologists, designers, lots of different folks here. So pick one or more that applies to you and your role. This will help Walt and I understand who's in the audience. And so based on that, we can tune the parts of the conversation, make sure we're explaining things clearly to the different folks. So please, we'll leave this open for about 15, 20 more seconds. Please choose one or more if you're a leader and a developer, or leader and a device designer, or you're doing design and program management. Go ahead and pick both if they apply to you as well. We realize we can't put every possible title in the poll, so other is there if you don't fit in any of the existing buckets. All righty, so why don't we go ahead and look at the results? I'm hoping we got a pretty good collection of folks. All right, it's got security people, leadership people, and other people. Well, thank you for joining, taking the poll, and we'll be off and running now. So it looks like we have people more on the security and leadership side today, along with lots of others. So I'm going to kind of get us started on the mHealth vertical. So every year NowSecure publishes mobile security benchmarks across different industry verticals. So some of the content I'm going to go through here briefly are based on this year's industry benchmark and infographics. So when we look at sort of mHealth in general, there's a lot of subcategories to go in this. It might be something like a Medtronic or a Dexcom, blood glucose monitor attached to the body with a mobile app. It could be, your Apple Fitness app or Fitbit or lots of other health. There's a lot of patient telemetry and remote home healthcare type scenarios. And there's the clinical setting technologies that are used in a lot of hospitals and medical centers as well. There's actually 350,000 applications in the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store, which is a number bigger than I thought there was. And the revenue growth has been tremendous. With the advent of COVID, there's an explosion in remote and mHealth initiatives, and that part of our business has grown dramatically in the last 2 years. Also, an interesting survey here that shows that now that the pandemic is over and people are back able to go outside, 73% of respondents still want to use telemedicine from home and not have to drag themselves to a medical scenario. So mHealth today is going to cover kind of a wide swath of different subcategories, but all of this is thinking about, today we're really thinking about the combination of mobile apps and device technology. So the things that mobile apps are talking to that are part of the healthcare delivery system, right? Whether it's monitoring technology like you see on the left, whether it's patient delivery and communications in the middle, whether it's attached augmentation, like here we've got a hearing aid. There's so many different things that apply here, but generally this is the combo of apps and devices interacting to serve the needs of healthcare professionals and the medical consumer. So with that, why don't you tell us what's going on here, Walt, because the world is changing with the FDA.
Yeah. So in April of last year, the FDA issued non-binding guidance. And prior to this, what was the current guidance was from 2014, kind of old, but cybersecurity has been on their minds for a while. Well, in December of last year, Congress passed the law to, I guess, to hurry things up. FDA has been taking a while to turn their non-binding guidance into binding. And that law goes into effect, or went into effect April this month. In March, the FDA said, and I got to quote it here because they're intentionally a little unclear. They generally intend not to issue refuse to accept decisions for pre-market submissions. So that doesn't mean they never will, but they're trying to be lenient up until October 1. And after October 1, every submission to the FDA has to fully comply with the law. So this is important. And I've got at the top a link to the guidance that was issued in April of last year. And at the bottom, I've got a link to the new law that came out in December. Go ahead.
So if we look at, why are these regulations coming through? Well, we could take a step back and kind of look at what's the overall risk profile look like for hundreds of apps in the app stores. So if you're familiar with NowSecure, we've got a mobile risk tracker. It's a public benchmarking tool that we launched a couple of years ago, and we look at lots of different industry verticals. And so I thought it would be interesting to grab a snapshot of kind of what we see from sort of roughly 595, 600 of the mHealth applications of all kinds. In our automated analysis of those hundreds of apps where we're analyzing them every time they're updated in the store, what we're finding is an average score of 69. So if you remember when you were in school, 90 to 100 is an A, 80 to 90 is a B, 70 to 80 is a C. This is basically a high D, low C for the category of mHealth. Now, some of these apps are in regulated scenarios. Some of these apps are more like, personal health training type apps. But 191 of these 595 applications have CVSS high scored risks, and that's not a good thing. That means they're subject to data leakage or privacy violations. You can see at the bottom, 97% of the apps have at least one security vulnerability, 70%, 69% of them actually leak private data. Now, we're not sharing this to scare you. We're sharing this because we want to realize that security is hard. Doing it the right way is difficult. And so what Walt and I want to do today is share information about what you should be doing and can be doing in your organization, from the architecture and design to the development process through the testing and the certification processes, especially with these new updates with the FDA. So with that, I will hand it over to Walt, and we'll have a couple slides here about what's going on in the detail level.
Okay. So what I'm going to talk about here is what's in the guidance from April of 2022, which is largely required by the new law, though the new law is at a fairly high level. So these are all things the FDA says are important and now mostly are required. Cybersecurity is part of the safety and quality regulations. Safety and efficacy have been what the FDA has required. Those two things basically sum up what it does. Saying that cybersecurity is part of safety means cybersecurity is part of the fundamental things that the FDA considers important. If it's not cybersecure, it's not safe. Transparency, it's now important for the end user to be able to use the device safely and to have it secure. We'll get into that more. And the FDA says you should design in security rather than bolt it on. If you've got a device and you want it to be secure, simply adding security to it is not the way to do it. Security is now part of the design. So when you write your requirements, security should be in the requirements. When you do your verification testing, security should be tested. It's not a separate thing. In D, have a secure product development framework. This is having a process, just like in medical devices, you need a software process. Well, now you need a security process for a process for development. Availability is important, minimizing downtime. And this is very interesting because up until now, the FDA has only said it has to be safe. If it fails, as long as it's safe, that's okay. That's not what we're focused on. Now with security, if it fails, if it's not available, if there's a problem with cybersecurity, it creates other problems, this is important. And then secure and timely updatability. So the FDA recognizes that there is no such thing as perfect security. You've got to recognize attacks and take care of them so that the equipment can quickly can recover from them. Go ahead. So a little more detail on what's expected. The first is authentication, knowing who's connected, such as with a password. Authorization, making sure that who's connected has permission to connect. Cryptography, this is typically for passing data, but it may be used for even for encrypting code. And code data and execution integrity. So this says that while the code is executing, it needs to be checking that there's not a problem, that there's no cybersecurity breach. And certainly when you're passing data wirelessly to something, or even over the internet, there's a high potential for security leaks. Confidentiality is now important. This is somewhat like HIPAA. The FDA does not regulate HIPAA. It's another part of the government, but now they're saying confidentiality is important. So things are broadening with the newer law. Event detection and logging is referring to detecting that there's been a cybersecurity event, an attack, logging it. And then the next one is resiliency and recovery. We've got to be able to recover from that so the device can either continue working or be restored to working. And part of that is updatability and patchability. You may download software update over the air, or in some devices, somebody may take a thumb drive and download new software. Now that opens up a potential. The device has to recognize whether the software that's coming to it is valid software, or if somebody's sending it who shouldn't be. A software bill of materials is important. And this is particularly focused on third-party software. And these days, most software and firmware has third-party components. You need to identify who created it, what version it is, and any issues that it may have. And by the way, I should mention that the security applies to any device with software. That's how the FDA defines it. So it doesn't even need to be connected. You would think this is applying to things that are wirelessly connected or even wired connected. But if a device has software, it needs to meet these requirements. You need an assessment of unresolved bugs. Unresolved bugs can be ways for someone to get into a device. Threat modeling is important. Trying to identify how the device could be attacked. And one other thing is testing. The FDA requires testing, and they require you to show how the testing is being done by a party that is separate from the one who created it. You know, if the same person writes the code and tests the code, there's a very high probability they're going to miss something. But they need to be independent and they need to have expertise. So an excellent way to do that is to use a third party like NowSecure. Go ahead. So they talk about security by design. This process will look an awful lot like the way you design a device, whether it's software or hardware, and now security. First, be aware of the regulations and requirements, and you need to create a document with the requirements in it. The same document that's got the requirements for your device needs to include the requirements for security. Then design the security as part of the product design. And at the end, test. This is where you do verification testing. So security is now part of verification testing. Go ahead.
All right. So Walt has talked us through the combination of the FDA's changed or evolving requirements and a really good set of best practices about how to do secure by design. And so what I'd like to do and kind of where I come from is okay, how do we actually put these practices to work? Now, for those of you who have been with NowSecure for a while or come to these sessions before, you'll understand that we'll take a look at this thing called the pipeline, which is how software gets produced. And for those of you who might be kind of new to this area, I'm going to give you some basics of software production. So the leading way to set up a software factory to build software today is an approach called DevOps. And DevSecOps is a way to do DevOps with security built in. So there's kind of a simple definition. Here's a common one people use here. It's the notion of the combination of best practices, tools, and automation that enables an organization to reliably deliver applications and services at a high velocity with security built in. So when you think about, years ago when I got started, before I had all this gray hair and when I had more of it, we were using, waterfall that might take years to produce a piece of software. And then we moved into agile so we could do it in weeks or months. Now people want to produce software in days or weeks and update software potentially every day. If your organization builds a mobile connected device and you detect a new vulnerability or issue in that device tomorrow, in the application talking to the device tomorrow, you want to be able to fix that really fast and push that fix out to all your mobile users. So the DevSecOps approach allows the development team, the QA team, the product team, the operation team, security teams all to work together quickly using a ton of automation in the production line. And I often use the analogy that DevSecOps is sort of like what Ford invented with the Model T production line. They realized that if you have a moving production line in the middle and each person specialized in their role, and you used consistency in the production process, you could be a lot more efficient in producing a volume of cars faster, but also the repeatability gives you consistency of quality in that production process. So that's finally basically come to software. So for the context of the kind of software we're building here, we have mobile apps and they're talking to things. Right? So that thing could be like the Apple Watch or the Oura Ring, on my hand. It could be the hearing aids that my father wears. It could be diagnostics in the healthcare setting, in a clinical setting. There's a variety of different kinds of combinations of apps and devices now that we're going to talk about. So inside your engineering, for example, whether you're doing a fully internal developed or you're doing some outsourced work, you're going to have a production pipeline for building the software, and you're going to have a production line for building the hardware. And so as we build that software pipeline, that process and workflow for building those mobile apps, your development organization probably has a picture something like this, where they choose a set of standards, they do some training, they establish requirements for what they want to build, they start writing software code, there's within DevOps, there's this notion of committing code to the server system. Then there's building the code, because you may have dozens of developers working on different pieces of code. They combine their source code, build it together, and then you test that code. Now you see this thing that looks like a feedback loop in the middle, and that's basically because developers write code every day and they test code every day, and it runs in a cyclical fashion. The genius of DevOps or DevSecOps is that I can run that cycle on a daily basis, so I can more quickly create new code or write new code and test it and release it into production. So once I'm all done with testing, I move it into staging and documentation and the rest, and then I go deploy it, and then I monitor it in production. Now, for the mobile apps that we're talking about, most of the time, these apps will live in the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store, although you might also be working on specialty devices where the mobile app is pre-installed in a specific kind of technology as part of a solution set, potentially for a healthcare setting. So if we think about what Walt was talking about earlier, and if we think about what I was just talking about the software pipeline, there's some things we can take and overlay them into the pipeline as a set of best practices. So the first thing is, are there any mobile or application security standards that we should apply that are relevant to FDA scenarios? And in the medical scenario, in fact, any application scenario where security matters, you should be using a standard like the OWASP MASVS. OWASP is the industry standards organization that establishes application security best practices and standards. The OWASP MASVS is the mobile version of their application security standards, and that was just recently updated. So you can pull that off the shelf and say, hey, this is a set of security standards we're going to use in our process. Now, the next thing you're going to do is, for people who write software, is you have product managers and architects and others who are going to write stories, create tickets that define the requirements. Now, while you're putting in the functional requirements of how should my mobile app behave, you should also be putting in any FDA-specific requirements, many of the ones that Walt just talked about, in terms of things you need to be able to do. You have to respect HIPAA, you have to handle failure conditions, and so on and so forth. So you make sure you get those requirements up front, so the software development teams are doing the right thing as they write their code. Modern technology today allows us to use automation to do continuous security testing in this cycle. So basically, everyday code is written, that code is tested. So the next day, any bugs that were introduced are fixed, and so on and so forth. So you get this fast feedback loop running using continuous mobile app security testing as part of the process. Now, for some kinds of applications, you might be able to push directly into the App Store, but for other kinds of applications, you might need to do some manual pen testing, depending on the complexity of the security requirements or the feature requirements. So we have a number of mHealth-oriented customers like Tidepool that I'm going to talk about in a little bit, and there they have a mobile app talking to a blood glucose monitor. Well, in that world, they're doing automated continuous security testing of the software, but before they go into final documentation and release, they're actually doing a manual pen test to make sure everything's working properly in the real world scenario with the real app talking to a real device actually attached to a body. So we want to be able to do that, and pen testing enables us to do that. Now, for a regulated device, you have to have documentation. So make sure that you're capturing the right details, you're creating the right documentation and preparing to deliver that to the regulators, because you want to get that approval. And then, of course, you're going to deploy once you have the approval and you're off and running. So many of the things we see in this list are just best practices for building software the right way and building it securely. But there's places to drop in where FDA-specific things around requirements, around documentation and deployment also need to be adapted to or included within your overall process. So we encourage you to learn more from those FDA requirements and make sure you bake them in. Now, what NowSecure brings to the table, while Voler is helping you with your design requirements and the process that you're running of how you bring a product to market, we're going to help you with mobile AppSec as a service, basically. So we're going to do continuous security testing in that pipeline for you. So many of the steps we just looked at, we can do for you, right? So we've got policy. You can configure policy so that you're using the MASVS, OWASP MASVS in a way that fits your FDA requirements as well. You can do some training in our NowSecure Academy environment. We can automatically test that code as you're building it. We can enable just-in-time remediation, where every ticket that we generate for security vulnerability we find includes code remediation instructions and sample code that helps the developer properly fix it and repair it. And then you can add in that continuous pen testing for those high-risk and complicated scenarios that maybe automation can't do as well. So organizations that do this are able to accelerate the release cycles while raising the bar on quality and making sure they meet those FDA mandates. So many times we engage with an organization that's in a very manual mode. What's great about these scenarios is that you can move into training, automation, policy-driven technology, embedded remediation, and continuous pen testing. All of these things help speed up the cycle and make sure you meet the release bar. Because in the end, it's not just about how long does it take you, but do you pass FDA requirements so you can go into production, commercial business? We want you to be able to do that. So, as I take a deep breath and a drink of water, when we bring it all together, Voler and NowSecure are your partners to be successful. Walt, why don't you help us summarize how Voler helps organizations here?
Okay, well, we design the electronics. We help you with the requirements and the verification testing if necessary. And we can work closely with NowSecure to make sure things are tested. You know, when you do a device, nowadays there's usually an app. So the testing of the app is critical. The device and the app together make a medical device. You can't test one without the other. And by doing things carefully and knowing what we're doing, we can get you to market faster.
And generally for everybody, it's about how do you get to that point of generating revenue, because you're a business in the first place, right? So together, Voler brings all the right things from the device side, and we bring all the right things from the application side so that you can get to market quickly and meet those security and FDA regulatory requirements, bringing speed, reducing the risk, and of course, reducing costs, right? The more you can automate your testing and automate your training, the less your labor costs are. And not only do you release faster, but you basically take cost out of the organization as compared to the old ways of doing things. Now, speaking of learning, we've got more learning content for you in a second. So in these DevSecOps Bunch sessions, we often like to ask the question of, what are you going to do next? So based on what you're learning today, what are you going to go do next? So feel free to pick any of these. You know, are you going to go have a look at the new FDA guidelines? Are you going to go investigate DevSecOps as a way to build and produce your mobile apps? Are you going to take a look at mobile app security automation or other things? This helps us kind of understand what were the most valuable parts of today's content, and where you're going to go next, because we want to make sure we're providing you with the right information. If we get certain answers, we might add certain follow-up information to all of you who are joining us today. So we'll leave the poll open for about another 15 seconds or so. We would ask you to pick one or more of these. And I'll remind you that Walt and I are going to be doing Q&A at the end here. So you're welcome to use the Q&A tab in your Zoom control to load some questions there. So Walt and I can answer those later. I've seen a few get asked already along the way. Again, your Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen will help you ask questions. So let's see the answers. Well, mobile security automation and others. So let us know if you want in the Q&A or the chat about what other things we might not have said that you think are most important for you next. Of course, we'll be sharing more information on the FDA guidelines, on Voler and NowSecure as well. I'm going to close that box out. So let's tell the audience about some of your case studies and your experiences here, Walt.
Okay, I'll go briefly. If you want more, we've got more on our website. The first one here is a non-invasive GI motility measurement. This is measuring what's going on in your gut. It's a little bit like a stethoscope for the gut, like a monitor of the electrical signals. So right now, about 1/3 of people who go into the doctor with problems in digestion get no diagnosis. They can't figure out what's wrong. This is a device that's going to help identify some of those, and over time could make a dramatic change in how medicine is delivered. This is a really cool device. and all it is a patch that you wear for a few days. The middle one is a way to treat dry eye. It's little devices that go on your eyelids for a few minutes. They apply heat, and that causes the fluid, the oils to start flowing and reduces dry eye for a long period of time, weeks or months. The last one is a heart pump. We did all the software for it. This is a class 3 device. Very interesting story, how we got the FDA to, they didn't have any questions on the verification and the results that we submitted. There's a link there to look at more case studies. Go ahead. So we also have a blog. There's a number of things you can look at on our blog, and there's a link there. And if you'd like to get our newsletter, you can sign up. We're happy to have you added to that.
Alrighty, and I would endorse the blog and the other communications resources that Voler has. I've had the opportunity to participate in some of those and been great conversations and discussions around all of it. Voler clearly knows what they're doing in this space, so we encourage you to take advantage of working with experts as a way to streamline, hit the market right when you get out, build it the right way, get it FDA approved, get it into production. So from the NowSecure side, I thought maybe I'd talk a little bit about Tidepool. We work with Medtronic and dozens of mHealth vendors. Tidepool's kind of interesting. You know, I am a diabetic and I do live in that world of managing diabetes. And they're really on a mission to help individuals really manage diabetes and reduce diabetes effect on the human population. So they've been working on new kinds of applications and experiences for users, and we've been able to work with them to automate security testing in the process so that they're able to get to market quickly, serve their patients faster, generate revenue, and meet their mission. And so in this world, they were leveraging our tools and our training and expertise to make sure they met their release cycles quickly. They were able to get their first products out and continue to evolve them, and we look forward to a long-term partnership with them, as we have done with a number of others. Now, this is an example where it's a medical application talking to a medical device. We also do a lot of work with organizations that have other kinds of health monitoring for fitness reasons, dietary reasons, things of that nature. We also work with medical organizations that have medical apps that connect to other physical infrastructure, like radiology scenarios, and in-hospital patient monitoring systems, remote telematics and remote patient services, for example, your remote doctor call in the cell phone app. So wherever you're in medical, we can help you from an application security perspective. I mentioned at the beginning, we'd have lots of references for you. NowSecure Academy is our online free training. So we have 60 hours of online free training available for mobile application developers and for mobile application security professionals, including some new courses we just are launching this week. You can surf to academy.nowsecure.com and get started for free. Please take advantage of that training. It was developed in conjunction with some federal agencies and some of our larger customers, and we're happy to provide that free to the industry. If you're new to DevSecOps, we've got a guide to building out a DevSecOps pipeline. And as I mentioned earlier, every year we publish an infographic on each of the major industries. There's a link to our publication of mHealth from this spring and the new infographic there. And we have the mobile risk tracker that I mentioned earlier as well. We do a lot of events, and twice a year we have a major online confab called NowSecure Connect. Stranger Vulns is our theme, which is a lot of fun. So if you want to go learn from last week's Stranger Vulns, you can just click here and get a rewind and access to all the replays from last year. We'll be doing a big one this fall. We typically get about 1,500 people involved in these, so there's lots and lots of resources you can take advantage of in that world. And so with that, we're going to migrate into Q&A. I want to thank Walt again here, and I'm going to go ahead and open the Q&A tab on my device so that I can have a look at the questions. Again, we can answer any of your questions here. Any ones we don't get to, we can always follow up with in the background as well. Let's see, get the Q&A tool open for me. Okay, so first question's for you, Walt. Do you need to implement cybersecurity for the FDA exactly as described in the guidance? What if my process is different?
That's fine. The FDA gives you guidelines that say this is a way to do it. It's okay to have another way. You may have to spend more time explaining that yours is as good or equivalent, but that's fine. You can do that.
All right, so next one actually I think is yours as well. And I guess I can answer some of this too, which is, does cybersecurity apply to all the devices submitted to the FDA?
It applies to devices that have software in them, which is almost all devices, but there are devices that, you know, if you've got a surgery knife, it probably doesn't have any software in it. Cybersecurity doesn't apply. But it's interesting that even if it's not connected and there's no way to get data in or out of it, cybersecurity applies. You would think it wouldn't, but it does.
So looks like the next one is for me. The question is, how do you automate security testing with or without the device? So I sort of tried to explain that a little bit before. So if you think about like a parallel process running, so most organizations, as they build software that connects to a device, they're writing the software, and as they build the software and test it, it's talking to kind of a virtual endpoint. It's not actually talking to the physical device all the time, right? It'd be really inefficient if everything the developer did in every piece of testing actually required the software to talk to the physical device. So most of our clients will stub out the back end and say, hey, my developers, I can unleash development here, but I don't have to talk to a real thing in order to build the code for the app, because you get a common set of interfaces that you can talk to. You basically spoof the back end. So people run this parallel pipe where most of the development and testing occurs in an automated sense, using the mobile app talking to kind of a virtual fake back end. And then there's components of testing during the cycle where you actually test against the real device. And there's automation you can use against the real device, because it's so taxing, you're not going to do it every day. You're just going to do it periodically. So maybe once a week, there's testing that hits the real device, or once a month. And certainly when you get later in the cycle, right before you're about to release, you definitely want to have the software talking to the physical device as part of the process. So if you think of it from that perspective, then you can automate a lot of the work for testing. You can do that for QA testing, UX testing, security testing, but it also makes it easier for developers to write the code as they're going through the life cycle process. All right, see, one more for you. I've done submissions to the FDA in the past without addressing cybersecurity. Has it really changed now?
Yes, it has definitely changed. It's been changing right along as the FDA has been spending more time paying attention. But with the new law that Congress passed, you cannot have a device get approved by the FDA without addressing cybersecurity.
All right, the one that I get here, and we'll close it down, is what level of security testing coverage do you have? Well, that's kind of a loaded question. So our automated testing engine runs a battery of 600 tests. They're built out of the MASVS and other industry standards like Google ADA, MASA, and the IOXT spec. And then we have expert pen testing that we layer into it for the things that can't get automated. So typically, if you're doing a regular release and you're security testing every day, that's a pass of 600 tests going every day. It combines static and dynamic interactive testing scenarios, and then you get the manual pen testing or the guided testing that allows for additional human interaction to complete that last mile. So it's NowSecure, we believe, and our customers tell us, has the deepest and broadest test coverage of any vendor that has both automated tools and manual pen testing services as part of it. And so with that, we are at the end. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Walt, would you like to share a closing thought?
Well, if you've got questions that come up later, I'm happy to talk to you. And I don't have my link here, my email, but it's Walt at, and then volersystems.com. Happy to talk to anybody and help out.
Very good. And thank you all for joining us today again on the this month's April DevSecOps Bunch. We'll be back again next month, as we are every month, with another partner and another topic. Want to remind you again that we did record today's session. Within a few days, you get a copy of the recording and a link to the slides. You also get a link to a number of the assets that we shared today. When you click on the slides, click on the link, you can also get to that content. The history of this DevSecOps Bunch now goes back a couple years. So if you found today interesting, have a look at some of the prior recordings. There's lots to learn in so many different ways. And again, we'll see you next month in the DevSecOps Bunch. Thanks again, Walt, and thanks everybody for joining us today.
Thank you.
Bye now.